afternoon, everybody. It's the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns half hour here on YouTube. My name's Tom Luongo. I hope everybody's having a good Friday. 1 second. Much better. All right. So, hope everybody's having a good Friday afternoon. As we approach the end of the week, markets are going to close soon, and I've got a lot to talk about. I just published, so for those of you who are new, watching me for the first time, you can follow my work over at goldgoatsandguns.com or tomluongo.me. I also post over on, cross-post everything over at steemit at steemit slash at goldgoatsandguns. You can also find me on YouTube at TFL1728 and here on YouTube. Or over on Twitter at TFL1728, and then on Periscope, Monday nights at 8 o'clock and Friday nights at 9. Links to all of this stuff are down below in the video description. And lastly, of course, you can, if you like the work, you can sign up for my Patreon and give me some support that way. That would be great as well. Got a lot I want to talk about here. I've been saving this up for a couple days now as I've had a chance to get a handle on what's been happening. Yesterday, I would have probably done all of this yesterday, but we were behind the curve getting the latest issue of the Gold, Goats, and Guns investment newsletter out, which needed to go out the door. So we took care of that, and now we can start to talk about what's happening here in both the geopolitical and global marketplace, because we're getting a better idea of what's actually happening. So tonight, the title of today's post is, Did Trump Just Set Off the Global Debt Crisis? And it's a good question. And I just published a, frankly, way too long post over at my blog, which is a link. There is a link down below. So my last two articles I've written, which ask two very simple questions, or two very important questions. One, today's article is, did Trump, or will Trump, torch the global economy on the bonfire of his own vanity? And the other is, and the other article is, ask the question of, is Trump willing to pay the price for what he wants to get in Iran? These are both two very, very important questions, because as we get clarity as to who Donald Trump truly is from a foreign policy perspective, that picture is not good. And I wish it were otherwise, and I wish I could say that I felt comfortable going forward with this man as president from a foreign policy perspective, but I'm not. And I'm not, even though he's nominally has himself a very strong win in North Korea. North Korea was not a problem that was really that hard to solve. All he had to do was finally say to everyone, okay, look, the North Koreans have a nuke. There's nothing we can do to stop this. We can either denuclearize the peninsula and give some concessions to Russia and China, or we can continue the way we've been going, and that's not working. And Trump's been very clear about this, that he's wanted to solve North Korea since, the 1990s. So that's fine. The problem is that Iran, which is also linked to North Korea, is not the same problem. It doesn't have the same geopolitical simplicity, because North Korea really wasn't that difficult a problem to solve. If Trump wants some trade concessions from Chinese Premier Xi Jinping, well, he can get those, and I'm sure that Jinping is more than happy to give him the kinds of some basic trade concessions that, frankly, China shouldn't have gotten under Bill Clinton in the first place. It was a great article by Alistair Crook a couple of weeks ago explaining all this, that, the Chinese got a great deal out of Bill Clinton by having Clinton, who needed a win during his presidency, negotiate a terrible trade deal with China. And Trump is right to be angry about that trade deal, and he's even right to be to try and improve on Chinese U.S. trade relations. On this point, I don't have any problem with him. There's many things about Donald Trump I still like a lot, but as far as Iran is concerned, the calculus here is completely different, and it is simply nothing more than an extension of the deep state's neoconservative party line that has been in effect and has been policy since the 1970s. And Trump is lockstep in with this policy. And to this point, we've, many of us, including myself, to my regret, we're trying to give him the benefit of the doubt over this. We're trying to say, well, maybe his rhetoric on Iran isn't as bad as, is worse than his bite, right? His bark about Iran is worse than its bite. I don't believe that. He brought John Bolton on not to solve North Korea. North Korea was already solved. He brought John Bolton on to effect regime change in Iran because that's always been his plan. And what he's been doing for the last 18 months has been to prep everybody for this. It's why he didn't kill the Iran nuclear deal immediately. He knew that there was an opportunity for him to first get a much stronger hold of his base. And what's become very obvious to me, and I've complained about this in recent weeks, is that his base, call them the MAGAPEDs or whatever you want to call them, but he's used them to now carry his water for doing what amounts to pretty much standard deep state foreign policy going back 50 years. They're now abreacting against what they now see as Obama's policy that Trump has inherited, which is nonsense. This is absolutely, the words that have been coming out of Donald Trump's mouth have been uttered by Bibi Netanyahu for the last 18 to 20 years. Nothing has changed. They wanted regime change in Iran in the 90s. They were arguing these exact same points. Guys like John Bolton and Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney and the rest of them. It's nothing new. Okay, this is nothing new. And to see Trump fall right in line with all of that, and then have the what's supposedly the conservative base, the kind of conservative libertarian base that he was elected on, a more humble foreign policy, a different foreign policy, get us out of Afghanistan, all of that. No, he's made the argument to them now that we need to do this in Iran because Iran is evil, because Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, which is nonsense. Okay. It's not that Iran doesn't sponsor terrorism. Iran does sponsor terrorism. But so does everybody else in this equation as well. And falling back on, my tribe, right or wrong, not really the best plan going forward, because eventually, if you're not careful, you run up against an opponent you can't control, and an opponent you ultimately can't beat for other reasons. Okay. Now, and this is part of my problem with Trump, I almost feel at some point that hasn't updated his worldview since 2003. That everything to him is still, all of these conflicts have been frozen for 20 years, and he's been railing privately in his, in his mansions and in his hotel, saying, "I can solve this. This is what the hell's wrong with these people." And then he goes in, and now he's in office, and he's doing exactly that. So we're at a point here where, because Trump's vanity on this, and I fully believe this, is what's driving a lot of this. His desire to be the anti-Obama. His desire to use his base's abject hatred of everything Obama to get what he wants now, to get them in lockstep behind him for a ruinous foreign policy of regime change in Iran. Because I'm not sanguine about the Iranian regime. Let's not mince words here. Let's not misconstrue what I'm trying to say. I'm not sitting here I'm not, in no way, manner, shape, or form is this an endorsement of the Iranian regime. None. Okay? You have to separate that out. This is not a false duality. Trump bad, Iran good, Iran bad, or Trump good. It doesn't work that way. It's far more nuanced than that. And any analysis or calculus of this situation has to be more nuanced than this as well. And if you fall, and unfortunately, so many people have now been radicalized in Trump's favor because of the deep state's near obsession to get rid of him, that they've actually now completely subverted the whole Trump revolution to now doing the deep state's bidding. It was kind of a heads I win, tails you lose scenario. If I'm not clear, let's break it down. So Trump comes into office, and the deep state is terrified of him changing U.S. foreign policy. So we go on we go on a complete tirade that Russia hacked the election and put Trump in office and all of this, and the FBI and the CIA and everybody has torched and the media have torched their credibility on the altar of trying to get rid of Donald Trump, and it hasn't worked. In the process, they've outed themselves as just literally traitors at worst, and misguided ideologues at best. And honestly, I think it's more worse than I think all these people are traitors, and they should be, and we should do to them what we do to traitors, and that's that. But look at the psychological space that they've put themselves in. They've now created an entire opposite group, right? And the people who elected Trump are now defending him with vigor while he nominates a woman for the head of the CIA who oversaw the torture program, which Trump doesn't have a problem with, because Trump has made it abundantly clear that he thinks torture is just fine. He really is that level of 800-pound gorilla. He's kind of scary. We have him surrounding himself now with open Iran hawks in every way. We have Bibi Netanyahu literally setting policy for him, lying through his teeth and handing those lies for Trump to replay. Every speech he's made on foreign policy could have been written for George W. Bush in 2004 or Barack Obama in 2012. Doesn't matter. As Putin says, presidents change, but the policy doesn't. And what we've got now is Trump can now safely parrot the neocon party line and have his entire drain the swamp base be on his side, because obviously the opposition to the Iran nuclear deal must be the right position, because Obama wanted it, because it was Obama's policy. Because anything Obama touched was terrible. Anything Clinton did was terrible. Anything the Democrats did when they were in power was terrible. And it's just classic Team A, Team B, in-group, out-group bias, which neither of these things impress me. And that abreaction is nonsense. And while they sit here and have faith in QAnon and all this other LARPing crap, and, just giving away their reason, while they hope that Trump is not betraying the whole thing. This is why the whole QAnon thing is so funny to me. It's so obvious that they've substituted QAnon for their anxiety over Trump betraying the revolution. While the rest of us here on the sidelines go, it was never a cult, guys. It was never a cult. He's not a Jesus figure. He's not a Messiah gonna save us from the evil Democrats and the deep state and bring back the America that you believe is gone. Not happening. And this all feeds into Trump's tremendous ego and tremendous sense of self-importance. Now, what does this have to do? What does any of this have to do with the global economy? Well, it has a lot to do with the global economy. That's the point. And because where we are in this is all of this was fine while the dollar was falling, right? The Chinese stopped recycling their trade surplus with us into U.S. Treasury bonds about a year ago. And they've now been just spending those dollars on the open market, however they can. And it's helped to support Trump's inherent mercantilism. And mercantilism is an economic and political ideology that's based, or philosophy that's based around or economic policy that's based around two main points: high protection tariffs and a weak currency. So low interest rates for a weak currency to expand the money supply, and high protection tariffs to keep foreign capital out. So you're going to export inflation. You're going to export your inflation, and you're going to drive the price of your exports down in order to gain market share from other people. Classic example of this is exactly what Shinzo Abe did when he came into power in Japan. He ran a classic mercantilist playbook, aside from the fact that Japan doesn't have an open capital account anyway. Okay, He drove the yen from 75 versus the dollar to 120 in order to boost Japanese exports, and in the process though, gutted the Japanese budget, and he can only get away with that because most of the debt that the Bank of Japan issued was bought by Japanese investors, because it's a very insular society from that perspective. But even they've gotten to the point where they don't want any more Japanese debt, and now they've reached the limit of that policy over the last five and a half years. Well, Trump has been running kind of the same playbook, while the Fed at the same time has been trying to raise interest rates. And the Fed wanted to start raising interest rates a couple of years ago, but the IMF and the foreign central banks begged them not to because the world was so fragile. And they were so worried about a rising dollar because so much debt had been issued in cheap dollars during the QE years that, hey man, you raise interest rates by a point and all of a sudden nobody can pay their freaking bills. Anybody who's ever had a variable rate mortgage knows this. If you want to go back to the 2007/2008 financial crisis, or what started the 2007-2008 financial crisis, was the rollover and reset in so many variable rate and zero down payment, no doc loans, right? Which were then sliced and diced and put into friggin' AAA securities and sent off and called CDOs, and then through financial wizardry created all this nonsense. And then eventually all that melted down because all those mortgage-backed securities were proven to be worthless because the mortgages were worthless and everybody went broke and and all this shit. So guess what? The same kind of debt crisis that existed in 2008 relative to the U.S. housing market, which nearly took down the entire global economy. Now, imagine that writ large for foreign corporate and sovereign debt around the world for the last 10 years. With the U.S. at zero bound rates and the U.S. having never defaulted on its debt or never canceled its currency. It's the reason the dollar is still the world's reserve currency is not because of the U.S.'s fiscal position, because the U.S. has never not paid its bills, where everybody else has. They've canceled notes, they've done this, they've just reneged on debt, whatever. So currencies are built on trust. And the entire global economy today still runs on dollars. And, you can take a look at the SWIFT tracker every month from the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Communications, Telecommunications, the SWIFT. They put out the numbers every month of the percentage of trade, the percentage of transactions that they clear, and in what currencies. And the US dollar is still supreme. The dollar, the euro hasn't really gained any traction. Neither has the yuan, for that matter. Oh, by the way, the yuan did for a while, and then it's fallen back. And the reason for that is that when the dollar is weak, it's going to be everywhere and in everywhere, and that's the way it is. And so many contracts, so many interest rate swaps, and all of this stuff is all written in dollars. It's all written in dollars. Oil futures contracts, all of this stuff. And so that's why we find it interesting. Obviously, we've been talking about things like the petro yuan as a countermand to that, the counterbalance to that. And sure, that's a very slow process. And right now, it's a teeny percent of the global market. The reality is that the world economy is still based around dollar-denominated debt. And the dollar has been weak for the last year and a half at the behest of the IMF and foreign central banks. But at the same time, the Fed has to raise interest rates. It has to unwind its balance sheet. It has to do this because it has a pension crisis growing in the United States that it has to try and deal with. It has a pension system problem here, in not just at the state level, but Social Security and everything. And so interest rates have to be normalized in the United States. Otherwise, things are just, otherwise we're going to have a meltdown. So that's what the Fed is doing. It's why the Fed ended QE and understood that there was a limit to this policy. At the same time, if it also behooves us to put pressure on our geopolitical opponents, Venezuela, Iran, Russia, China, to have a stronger dollar. Well, the first three, certainly. The last one, not so much. The Chinese actually want a weaker yuan. They've actually allowed the yuan to appreciate almost way too far. I wrote a blog post about this a couple of weeks ago. You can find it at my blog over at goldgoatsandguns.com. The point being that the world is not ready for a spike in the dollar, and the dollar has now significantly bottomed. I can show you charts and stuff, and as a matter of fact, I probably should pop up some charts here just to make my point abundantly clear. Hold on for a second. Do this real new tab or new window, not new tab, new window. Bring that over here. You come over there. All right, so let's pop open that, make you large, and then switch. All right, so yeah, hi, welcome to investing.com. It's the site that matters. So because it's where you can get a tremendous amount of good information. So here's the US dollar index. Let's turn that into a candlestick chart. Let's put on the weekly chart, and then we can see. If you look at a weekly chart of the dollar, the dollar for the past year or so, or pop out further and go back to the monthly chart, you can see that the dollar, once the Fed changed its course, this is the taper tantrum from 2014, and then after that, the dollar traded sideways for a while. It was about to break out after Trump was elected, and then Trump has pursued a weak dollar policy, but there's a limit to that, and a stronger euro policy, and there's a limit to that. And now the market has bottomed, and now it's breaking out higher. This is your downtrend. This is a one-bar reversal. This is a follow-through, and we're now well past, and we're looking at resistance here at 92.36. We're above that for May. We could easily hit 94 or 95 on the dollar, where the resistance is next at about 95. Okay, so that's where we are on the dollar, right? All right, now let's look at the euro. Go over to the euro. Same story in reverse. Here's the weak dollar wave, and the euro's been in a bear market since 2014. It's got a bit of a triple bottom here, but it's going to fall. That's going to fall at some point. The euro now is ready to fall over. We had a nice long rally, then a single bar reversal in April, and now into May we're continuing to fall. And support for the euro lies at $1.15.5 or so. That's the euro. Now let's look at bonds. We go to the U.S. Treasury bonds, and what everybody's worried about, the U.S. 10-year, right? Run over to the U.S. 10-year. Come on, today. Thank you. All right. We go over to the U.S. 10-year, and here we are when we back out, and we note that 3.05% is our line in the sand. We breached it last month. We've breached it again this month, but we haven't closed above it. This is a breakout pattern right here, and this is just retesting the breakout level. We're going to see another push higher here in bonds very soon now. I don't think this is any way a cycle wave high or anything. I think this is just the beginning of the next leg higher in rates. We don't want to see, and so a move above 3.05% on the 10-year, we might come with a commensurate continued flattening of the yield curve, because the Fed continues to raise rates, but the Fed only has control over the short end of the yield curve, i.e. the 2-year. So the 2-10 spread, the difference between the yield on the 2-year and the 10-year is what governs so much of the marketplace. It certainly governs the entire freaking mortgage industry. The 2-10 spread is where banks make their money. It's where they're able to keep their reserves. The reserves of the banking system are starting to drop as well. And as I note in my article from today, the foreign central banks are selling treasury bonds that they have on reserve with the Fed locally, which is another way of saying they're defending their currencies against a rising dollar. So they're worried about a rising dollar. So the dollar is beginning to rise. Oh yeah, that's going to put pressure on the ruble. Okay, fine. It's going to put pressure on the Venezuelan peso. Whatever. It's already toilet paper. Putting more pressure on it isn't going to turn it into anything. It's still just toilet paper at that point. It has reached the zero bound in terms of usefulness. You can still wipe your ass with it. Same thing with the Iranian rial. Fine. The Iranian rial is blowing up, but it's blowing up for two reasons. One, yeah, there's a stronger dollar. Yes, the threat of sanctions going on, and Trump. And Trump's signaling that he's going to exit the deal has retarded capital inflow into Iran for months now. Fine, fair enough. But at the same time, the Iranians, announced a couple of weeks ago that they would stop accepting dollars in trade anyway, and we're moving to euros, which is a signal from them that we know that Trump was going to end the deal, and the nuclear deal, and we're still committed at a certain level to trying to keep the deal solvent as long as our European partners in the deal honor the deal as well. And so guess what, Angela Merkel, you need some support for the euro and capital markets. We have your back. We'll soak up those excess euro. We'll soak up some of those excess euros by still selling you oil if you are willing to stand up to Donald Trump and this global sanctions bullying that he's going through. It's pretty obvious to me at this point, the way he's been acting since the beginning of the year, and the way he's been putting on sanctions willy-nilly, and the way he's been threatening allies and enemies alike, that at this point Trump wants complete obedience, and he's willing to play kind of Nixon's Crazy Ivan routine with literally everybody. My problem with that is at some point someone's going to stand up to him and say, okay, that's fine. We're not listening. And China's already stated unequivocally they're not going to listen. So now what happens next? The dollar is starting to rise. Debt servicing around the world is getting expensive. Zero had just published an article literally not 45 minutes ago saying, which I have a link to down below, emerging market debt is getting crushed really quickly with this little teeny move in the dollar index. All that's happened is the euro has come back from being massively overvalued at $1.24 to $1.25 back to somewhat more reasonably valued at $1.19, though still, honestly, the euro should be trading at around parity. So it's still 20% overvalued as opposed to 25 or 26% overvalued. So the dollar is rising. European debt is also rising with it because European and American bond spreads can't get too wide. Now what? You're setting up, what he's doing is he's setting up to reap the exact whirlwind he's trying to avoid, which he doesn't want a stronger dollar, but he's starting to create the very kind of super cycle spike in the dollar as things get out of control, right? We're seeing a sharp reversal of dollar flows as the dollar has made a tiny move from being oversold at 89 to 90 as measured by the U.S. dollar index, trade-weighted U.S. dollar index, to 92. What happens if it goes to 95? Well, the 10-year will probably go to 3.5%. LIBOR will probably push higher towards 3%. I mean, this is what you have to understand. All of these things are connected. And it's like, does Donald Trump really, truly not understand global capital flow? Right? We put all these sanctions on Russia in the last couple of weeks, and yeah, there were a few weeks worth of diciness in the market. The ruble spiked to 64 or so. The MISEX sold off by 10 or 12%. MISEX just put in an all-time weekly high closing, like 3 hours ago. The ruble's back down to 61. The Russians are putting in a monthly trade surplus of anywhere from $9 to $15 billion a month on an economy that's less than $2 trillion. They have almost $500 billion in foreign exchange reserves. Over 10% of which is gold. Okay? And gold at a suppressed price of $1,300 an ounce. So what happens next? What happens next is that we start to see failures in sovereign debt around the world and potentially in first world markets. It's one thing for Venezuela to default under debt. So what? It doesn't matter that Argentina defaults under debt. Hell, they do that shit every 5 or 6 years. But what happens now? We've got the Malaysia just elected a new government for the first time since independence. UNMO / the Parisian Nationale are not in power for the first time ever. Markets are roiling over that. The ringgit is getting crushed. Malaysian debt's going to get crushed. The Turkish lira is blowing up. These are all, Erdogan's out there saying that debt is immoral, which he's believes in Islamic banking anyway. So what happens next? Does Turkey start defaulting on their debt and just refusing to pay? What about the Malaysians? I mean, this is where this stuff starts, and then tomorrow, all of a sudden, we hear about a bank failure in Hong Kong or Singapore. And then before you know it, it's a bank failure in the Caymans or in not Luxembourg, but Austria. And then after that, it's an Italian bank gone bad, or some other, or a UAE bank or whatever. And all of a sudden, the dominoes start falling because people can't pay their debts. And this is a global debt crisis that looks exactly the same as in theory, in practice, writ large, that we went through in 2008. So in 2008, it took down all the money center banks in New York, which then had to be bailed out by the central banks. This sovereign debt crisis, when the dollar goes through its super cycle high, this crisis is bigger than the central banks. This one destroys the ECB and its credibility. This one destroys the Bank of England. Okay? This one torches the credibility of the Federal Reserve. That's what a sovereign debt crisis looks like. This is where governments fall. This is where geopolitical alliances shift radically. This is where open warfare happens. Okay? All of these things are on the table. All because of what? Because Donald Trump feels that Iran, Islamic regime, doesn't deserve to be a part of this planet? Don't think that they don't understand this. Don't think that they're not trying to play this game of financial attrition to engender this exact response. He's falling into, as far as I'm concerned, he's falling into the exact trap that the Russian, Chinese, Iranian alliance is setting for him, which is, look, you're going to set off a global debt crisis if you're not careful. Sure, you can knock some planes, or you can knock out some radar institutions and installations, and you can let Netanyahu get his rocks off, bombing what he thinks are Iranian positions or whatever. He can lie in the media all he wants about how Iran is evil. That's fine. You can even send some planes over Iran. Remember, the Russians just sent large numbers of planes to multiple air bases in Iran. They're going to have S-400s covering those air bases as well. Sure. Are they going to stand in the way of direct aggression there? Probably not. Excuse me. Probably not. The same way they did in Syria. Why? Because they don't have to. What most political analysts don't understand is that politics is driven by economics. Political responses and military, and even some military responses or non-responses, are driven by economics. And so it's really important to understand that. I'm not saying that I'm happy personally with Putin not defending Syria the other day by giving them by having the better equipment there, or having turned on the S-300s and actually shooting more Israeli assets out of the sky. I think someone needs to stand up to the Israelis. But at the same time, is it exactly the right time to do it? Do you do it right now when Iran is going through a currency crisis? Do you do it right now while your financial markets are still in flux thanks to these weird and idiotic and counterproductive sanctions? Or do you wait a couple of months? Do you wait until the World Cup is over? Because you don't have time right now, and you don't have the manpower to police all of these things. It's a good question. These same people were complaining that Putin wasn't intervening in Syria in July of 2015, that he wasn't doing something about this earlier. He showed up in October, and they started kicking complete ass. If you think that the people who saved Assad's ass in 2015, all of whom were in power then, and all of whom are still in power, Xi, Putin, Rouhani, Erdogan. Well, Erdogan was on the other side at that point, but now he's on. I mean, think about it. Then it was just Xi, Hassan Nasrallah from Hezbollah, Putin, and Rouhani / Soleimani from Iran. Soleimani, the head of the Iranian IRGC Quds forces. Today, you can add Qatar, who just bought a 19% stake in Rosneft, and who were backing Al-Qaeda in Syria and Idlib, and Turkey, who was allowing ISIS and Al-Qaeda to travel across the border from Idlib into Aleppo and back again, while escorting ISIS oil caravans out of the country. I mean, It's a completely different scenario. The Saudis are now in serious trouble financially, getting shaken down by mafia boss Trump over still continuing to use a dollar, to accept the dollar for their oil, when the best thing they could do if they wanted to get out of their current financial situation is to let the real free fall, end the peg to the dollar, let the dollar free fall and accept whatever damn currency they wanted. To let the real free fall and accept any damn currency they wanted that was offered or tendered for their oil. Because I got news for you. You know what's going to happen next? I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it until you people get it through your heads, or until everybody gets it through their heads. The Chinese are going to double the amount of oil that they buy for Iran. And they're going to drop the amount of oil that they buy from the Saudis. They've already started the process. Every time they're given the opportunity and the excuse to not buy some Saudi oil, they don't do it. Sinopec dropped its tender offer by 40% last month. Now, they said it's because most of our refineries are going through their maintenance schedule. Got news for you. Iran cut its price, and they bought a lot of their oil from Iran that month. All Iran has to do to survive this is undercut the Saudis by 50 cents a barrel, with oil at a 3-year high, and accept yuan for it, or accept dollars from China. You know, China can pay for it. If they need dollars that bad, China can just hand them dollars for it. They can hand them yuan. They can hand them rubles. They can hand them frickin' soybeans or washing machines, whatever the hell else they want. I got news for you. India's doing that. India did it back in 2012. They were trading oil, and the neocons then were laughing about this stuff. I remember writing blog posts about this going, these people are out of their minds. These are dollars that are not going, these are barrels of oil not being traded in dollars. The same neocons, the same people writing articles today about how this is such a great move by Trump, we're laughing at Iran, and India doing bilateral barter, basically, oil for washing machines and soybeans and farm equipment and whatever. Give a shit. We have oil, you have stuff we need. We don't need dollars as an intermediary. We don't need to go buy the shit on the futures market in a controlled price environment where we're getting fucked on both sides on both the bid and the ask. That's why they were laughing. They weren't really laughing. They were actually crying in their beer, because Iran's oil output was supposed to collapse even more than the 800,000 barrels that it dropped. It was designed to affect regime change then. It failed then. We kicked them out of the SWIFT system, for Christ's sake. Today, China and Russia have their own versions of the SWIFT system, which you don't think Iran has the keys to. Pull the other leg, it plays Jingle Bells. Christ. Come on, guys. I mean, when you stop to think about all this stuff, I'm like, really? You really think this is going to work? Okay. Trump's going to look just like Obama did, with egg on his face 3 years from now, and then he's going to be begging for a nuclear deal. If it lasts that long. It's not going to last that long. And he'll be begging for some friggin' deal. This is the same way Obama was. And as I said the other day in my in my article about whether Trump's willing to pay a price or not, just responding to one of the comments, 27 actually was the low. But yeah. So, now oil's at a 3-year high. Well, guess what, Shane? If you agree with everything I just said, then just wait for gold to break 1375 on a weekly closing basis. That's all. Because that's truly the beginning of the sovereign debt crisis. Gold breaks out alongside the dollar and alongside the stock markets, and the debt's all getting sold. That's when the panic starts. That's when gold is going to go nuts, and you're going to be able to, and there's going to be a lot of money to be made. The cryptos will go nuts too, because they're a proxy for gold. Yes, Liz, sanctions are stupid. Because counter sanctions are usually more effective. If you look at what Trump did earlier in the year, tried to put sanctions on aluminum. I don't want to get too far off my original point, but let's talk about this for a minute. Put sanctions on aluminum, thinking, we'll just spin up new aluminum factories here in the United States. It'll be good for jobs, huge. It'll be good for jobs. Whatever. I refuse to do a real Trump impression. And then a week into this, the entire global supply chain for aluminum was in turmoil. Aluminum had jumped had doubled in freaking price, and Glencore was screaming, and Rio Tinto didn't know how it was going to source ingots for clients, and and everybody was going crazy. And Rusal was sitting there going, "Okay, yeah, our shares are down 65-70%. Yeah, we're going to have to probably get a bailout from the Russian government. Yeah, okay, fine. We're going to have to shut up an aluminum plant that we have in the UK and the Netherlands and all these other places that we have these plants. Okay, fine. Global production of aluminum is going to drop like a rock. All of a sudden, they're like, Mnuchin was like, okay, you got 6 months. Wind down your business. Like, who are you going to buy it from? Rusal produces 15% of the world's aluminum. The Russians produce a shit ton of the world's titanium. These are the two main ingredients in airframes. Iran needs commercial airliners. The Russians now have a commercial airline industry that for the first time ever. I wonder who's going to get the Iranian aircraft orders. Boeing? Airbus? Or Russia? I can't remember the name of the company. But this is a big deal. I think I mentioned this to you guys a few months ago when the Russians are now selling commercial aircraft. Why not? It's not like they don't have, it's not like they don't have, aerospace technology. They, arguably their fighters are better than ours. Depending on the fighter, depending on the matchup, depending on the pilot, depending on, the situation. Under many circumstances, most Sukhois, certain Sukhois will run rings around even F-16s and F-18 Tomcats. So, but I'm not going to get into, I don't want to get into that situation. That argument will probably piss a whole lot of people off for saying it's heresy, but it's true. All right. The Russians don't need to export their aluminum, their titanium. What happens to the global market at that point? We get into an actual war and planes start getting shot down, or never get off the hangar decks of the aircraft carriers. How are you going to build new ones? Yeah, we've got aluminum and titanium stores, but not very much. And if anybody's ever worked in the metallurgy industry, in the metal finishing industry, which I have, I can tell you that, these are highly specialized industries. These are highly specialized single crystal, these turbines and these turbine blades are these are expensive, right? And, they use trace metals and in quantities that are incredibly expensive. And you double the input cost of the base metals, the titanium, the aluminum, the magnesium, and all of a sudden you're like, we can't make these freaking things. Our budget was just blown out, and this is the Pentagon. Our budget was just blown out buying all the tungsten and the rhenium and the other shit that we need. Don't talk metals markets with a chemist. All right, so and then the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which I talked about last summer, the fact that the Russians have the sanctions hammer when it comes to uranium. You'll notice that Trump never makes a freaking peep about uranium. And this has nothing to do with Uranium One. That Uranium One was about reserves, about bringing yellow cake out of the ground. Yellow cake is not uranium. It's not fuel. That's the upstream market. The midstream market is, then there's the transport market, then there's the enrichment process, then there's the final product into actual honest-to-God fuel that you can put into nuclear reactors. And I got news for you. The Russians own that shit. The Russians and the Europeans are the ones that make most of the single work functions, single work unit for the uranium market, without a doubt. So now what? So if the Russians ever wanted to, end this sanctions tit for tat, all they got to do is bring the word uranium into the mix. All they had to do with aluminum was bring the word titanium into the mix, and everything shut up. Everybody shut up overnight. They mentioned in passing, well, maybe we could not export so much titanium. Anybody who looks at the history on the EU having to follow the U.S. sanctions regime over Crimea knows that the Europeans are not happy with the outcome. They've been harmed far more than the Americans have, because the Americans and the Russians don't have much trade. Uranium and aluminum really are like most of it. Okay, we don't buy any oil from Russia. We don't buy any gas from Gazprom. We buy uranium. We buy titanium, at least through third parties. We buy aluminum, You can source all this stuff through third parties or whatever, but at the end of the day, that's where most of the trade between the United States and Russia is. It's not very important. Why the United States can put the most ridiculous sanctions on Russia that imaginable, because it doesn't hurt the American economy. But if you then extend those sanctions to anybody who does business with Russia at all, and say, we will sanction you if you do business with Russia, as we're doing to the Europeans now, well, then all of a sudden, everybody's freaking life gets really ugly really quick. And that's where the power is. But if at some point the Europeans stand up for themselves and go, you know what? We're still buying Iranian oil. You know what? Yeah. We're still going forward with our E&P contracts with NIOC and with NIOC. It says Total or Eni or anybody else who's cut deals with them over the last 3 years. And then the big thing happens. What does the United States do at that point? I mean, we're doing this already over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And still it's getting built. And still it's going through. Is Trump going to go to world war? Is Trump going to bomb freaking? What's he going to do? At some point, all of these pressure policies reach their limit. And you can't do any more. And they've already done the nuclear option financially with Iran, and Iran has survived. They cut them out of the SWIFT system, for Christ's sake. At that point, once they've survived that, they can survive anything. And my argument here is very simple. Iran may be, at a demographic level, more willing to, desire to, and Liz, I'll get to your question in just a second, more willing, there's a groundswell of opposition, to the existing regime. Everybody knows this. But at the same time, if the United States and Israel and the Saudis continue to press them as if it's an existential threat, like we're doing, like we're going to have regime change, and you got John Bolton out there saying, we're going to put the weird cult-like evil Sunni radicals from the Mujahideen al-Kaq, or whatever their name is, in power, the MEK, they're not going to stand for that. I don't think, actually, User 13, I don't think that Boeing has any existing contracts with Iran. To be honest with you. But the point about that, and I'll finish this point, and I'll go back to Liz's point. Because this is a good specific one. It's not really that Russia will take the business away from Boeing that could have been there for Boeing. It's the fact that the Russian aerospace business gets business that it would have never gotten, that it may never have gotten in the first place. That business could have easily gone to Airbus. And it's now it's helping to legitimize the Russian aerospace industry, and they could then turn around and take business from Boeing by proxying later on, by outbidding them. And certainly with a cheap ruble and continually trying to force the ruble down, you're only making it easier for Russian, the Russian aircraft industry to bid those contracts in the future, especially if the planes are better or if the planes are of similar quality. I'm not saying that they are. Okay, I mean, finally, at the end of the day, all things have to be considered, right? But the potential is there for them to take global market share and no longer just be a two-headed giant, but actually be a 3 or 4-headed giant as things go along. To Liz's question, which is there any hope that Trump will come up with a better Iranian deal, i.e. nukes and trade? It is possible, but that's not the policy. It's absolutely possible. It's right there in front of him. This is why I'm so freaking angry with him. It's so obviously right in front of them. And he's not doing it. He is committed to a regime change in Iran. The memo was leaked the other day that this was policy. This policy has been in place for God knows how long. And nothing's going to... And he's committed to it. And every action that he has taken since he's become president with respect to Iran has been to up the pressure for the purpose of regime change. He thinks passive regime change, or worked with Cuba. I think he's deluding himself into thinking that it worked with North Korea. And if he is, he's just bluffing because he knows better. Or his advisors don't have the fucking heart to tell him that, they got a nuke. Settle. Um, right, the licenses and User 13, don't misunderstand me. I understand that their licenses to sell planes to Iran are going to be revoked. Everything's going to be revoked. Trump is going to try and do everything imaginable to isolate them from the world. And he's going to put an unbelievable amount of pressure on Europe. And the possibility exists here that Europe will say no. Oh, wow. Huh. Okay, I understand what you're saying. I've seen your private post. I did not know about the contract, a $20 billion contract with Iran. Yeah, that'll go to the Russians now. The Russians will step in and they'll supply that contract. It's crazy. Okay, so they're going to lose that. There's $20 billion that the Russians, it's going to be in rubles. Who cares? It is. It's what we do. It's what we've always done. Because, it's about morality. It's not about money. It's about morality. And it's about saving Israel. It's about defining peace in the Middle East on Israel's terms and Israel's terms alone. And so the deal that Trump is going to make is that, okay, Iran, if you give up the mullahs, we'll back off. You can have peace in the Middle East. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I don't know if you guys have noticed it, but I have. I found it really funny, actually, that within 24 hours of Trump leaving the nuclear deal, I don't know if you guys saw this on Twitter or not, but I saw a whole lot of this for about 48 hours. I haven't seen any of it since. Oh, by the way, how there's all of these Iranians coming out of the woodwork, all of a sudden have Twitter accounts telling us how thankful they are for Donald Trump for killing the nuclear deal. Have you seen that shit? That's like the Saudis buying a whole bunch of advertising on Twitter back in the fourth quarter in order to be able to say to investors, "Oh, you can still don't bail on us because we turned a profit for the first time because the Saudi owners threw billions of dollars into the Twitter ad hopper," which I saw on my feed, for Christ's sake, which is insane. It's the same thing. Is there any? Oh, it was insane. Earlier this week, it was the most blatant psyop I think I've seen yet. Especially on Twitter. It was terrible. Trump continues to surprise pro and con, Liz says. Perhaps he will choose success over Bibi. Has he yet? The past is prologue. I'm not trying to be snide or mean or dismissive. I'm really not. I want to believe otherwise. I just don't see it. So, yeah, that's where we are. Not great. Wow, this is 54 minutes. I should have stopped a while ago. All right, guys. But there's so much to talk about here. It's so insanely, it's so big. And we're going to talk about this stuff again tonight on Periscope. So I can probably, cut off here. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll watch what happens over the weekend. It'll be interesting to see if Bitcoin regains 9,000 over the weekend after the triple whammy it took today. And we'll see what crazy shit happens over the course of the next couple of hours. Because, of course, there'll be something ugly happen after the market closes this afternoon. You can mark my words on that one. That's just the way things work around here. All right, you guys have a great afternoon, and I will talk to you tonight on Periscope, 9 o'clock. If you're watching this now, you can go there 9 o'clock tonight, or Mondays at 8. I'll probably be on Halsey News, on Halsey Live on Tuesday night at 9:30. And we'll probably do this again one more time over the weekend. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. And if you do subscribe to the channel and you want to get direct updates as to when I'm going to go live next, you got to go into your notifications and turn notifications on directly. Okay? All right, you guys have a great afternoon. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.